I confronted him on my doorstep, the rain from the night before still dripping from the eaves. My voice cracked as I told him he should have told me the truth. I told him I had followed him. I told him I had searched his name. I told him I knew who he was, what he had done. I told him he had made a fool of me. He let me say it all. He stood there in his expensive coat with his 2 cups of coffee, and he let me throw every word like a stone. He didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself. He just listened. And that made it worse, because it meant he had known this was coming. It meant he had chosen to let me find out this way instead of telling me himself. When I finally ran out of words, when the silence between us was thick enough to choke on, he stepped closer. There was no threat in it, no anger, no cold billionaire calculation. Just quiet honesty. He set the coffee down on the railing and he looked at me, really looked at me, the way he had in that cafe on the very first day. I didn't tell you, he said softly. His voice, that low gravel that had once felt like a secret, and now felt like a confession, because I wanted you to see me, not everything else. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him that he was everything else, that his money and his power and his ruthlessness were not separate from him, that they were him, but the words wouldn't come, because in that moment, standing on my crumbling doorstep with rain dripping down my neck and my heart in pieces at my feet, I realized the terrible, unforgivable truth. I had already fallen for him before I knew what he was. I had fallen for the way he held my hand like it was made of glass. I had fallen for the way he remembered my coffee order and the name of my childhood pet and the song I hummed when I thought no one was listening. I had fallen for the man who walked on the traffic side of the street and opened doors and looked at me, like I mattered more than anything else in the room. That man was real. I knew he was real. But so was the other one. The one in the headlines. The one in the convoy of Zuvs. The one whose name made people move aside or else. You should have told me, I whispered, and this time my voice didn't shake. It was just tired, just sad, just the sound of a woman who had finally stopped pretending. He reached out, slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. His fingers brushed my cheek, pushing a strand of wet hair from my face. His touch was warm. It was always warm. You're right, he said. I should have. But I was selfish. I wanted one thing in my life that wasn't about the name. I wanted you. Just you. Not what you could give me. Not what you could do for me. Just you. I closed my eyes. I let his touch linger. And I made a decision that I knew, even as I made it, would either save me or destroy me. No more secrets, I said. No more hiding. If I'm going to do this, if I'm going to stay, I need to know everything. All of it. The good, the bad, the unforgivable. I need to see you. All of you. He was silent for a long moment. The rain stopped. The world held its breath. Then he nodded. Once. A man accepting a fate he had chosen long ago. All right, he said. But Amara, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you know, you belong to it. To me. And I don't let go of what's mine. He opened the door of the black SUV that had appeared silently behind him. He held out his hand. And I, the fool who had once not even looked twice, took it. I stepped into that car with my heart in my throat, ready to see the monster behind the man. But when the doors locked and the engine purred to life, he didn't take me to his penthouse or his boardroom. He took me to a cemetery. And the name on the oldest grave, worn smooth by a century of rain, was his own. I left him. That is the truth I have to start with, even though it makes my chest ache to say it. I left him standing on my doorstep with his 2 cups of cold coffee and his hand still reaching for mine. I stepped out of that black SUV before the door even closed. I walked back into my crumbling apartment, locked the door, and leaned against it until my knees gave out. But somehow he never really left me. I told myself I needed distance from a world that felt too big, too complicated, too dark. I told myself I was protecting my small, quiet life from a man who had never known either word. I told myself 1,000 lies to justify the one truth I couldn't face. I was terrified. Not of him, of how much I still wanted him even after I knew. So I cut him off. No calls, no texts, no walks in the park or shared umbrellas in the rain. I erased his number 3 times and memorized it 4. I threw myself into work and late nights, and the kind of exhaustion that leaves no room for dreaming. But life didn't go back to normal. It became easier in ways I couldn't explain. The landlord, who had been threatening eviction for 3 months, suddenly called to say my lease was extended, indefinitely, at half the rent. My boss, who had never remembered my name despite 2 years of perfect attendance, pulled me aside and offered me a promotion. A new position, one I hadn't applied for. One that came with a corner office and a salary that made me check the number twice. Opportunities appeared like flowers after rain. Problems softened like butter left in the sun. My car, which had been 1 cough away from the junkyard, was mysteriously repaired overnight by a mechanic who refused to take payment. The collection agencies stopped calling. The late fees vanished from my credit card statements. And though I never saw him, I felt it. Not control, not pressure, not the heavy hand of a man who thought he could buy my forgiveness. Just a quiet presence. A subtle hum beneath the surface of my days. Like someone was making sure I was okay without asking for anything in return. No notes, no gifts, no grand gestures demanding acknowledgement. Just the slow, steady unraveling of every problem I had ever complained about in his presence. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself the universe had simply decided to stop kicking me for a while. But I knew. I knew because every time something good happened, I thought of him. Every time a door opened that had been locked for years, I saw his face. Every time I caught myself smiling at nothing, I felt the ghost of his hand on my cheek. He wasn't stalking me. He wasn't hovering. He was just there, in the margins, in the spaces between my breaths. A man who had moved mountains for me and then stepped back so I wouldn't have to see him do it. And then came the reality of who he was. People started noticing me. Not in the way you notice a stranger on the street, but in the way you notice someone who has been touched by something larger than themselves. Colleagues who had never spoken to me suddenly wanted coffee. Neighbors who had ignored me for years smiled like we were old friends. Reporters started lurking outside my building, cameras dangling from their necks like hungry mouths. Questions were asked. Where did I go to school? Who are my friends? How did I know him? The subtle weight of being connected to someone powerful settled onto my shoulders like a coat I hadn't asked for, but couldn't take off. I was no longer just Amara. I was Amara, the woman who had walked away from Devero. And that made me fascinating in a way I had never wanted to be. I tried to ignore it. I tried to shrink back into my small life. But the spotlight doesn't care if you want it. It only cares that you're standing in it. The night everything almost went wrong, I was walking home from work. Late. Too late. The streets were empty, the rain was falling, and I was so tired I didn't notice the car following me until it was too late. 2 men got out. Big men. Men with hard faces and harder intentions. They didn't say my name. They didn't have to. I saw the recognition in their eyes, the same recognition I had seen in the guards that night I followed him. They knew who I was connected to, and they had come to use that connection against him. I ran, but my heels were wrong, and my lungs were weak, and the rain made the pavement a mirror of fear. I made it half a block before one of them grabbed my arm, and then he was there. Not overwhelming, not consuming. Not the billionaire in the headlines or the ruthless name on the lawsuits. Just him, the man from the cafe, the man who walked on the traffic side of the street. The man who looked at me like I mattered more than anything else in the room.